Thank you very much also from my side to be invited for this really interesting discussion today. My name is Katy Wiese and I work on economic transition policies for the European Environmental Bureau. So we are a large network of different environmental organizations based in Brussels. So we represent voices from over 160 members in all the EU member states, as well as accession countries on the European policy level. And we really work on a wide range of different issues that you can also see here, so like climate, nature, health and environment, but also on some horizontal issues, like when you think about the global and regional policies, such as sustainable development goals and also environmental justice. So I actually wanted to start saying where we are right now, and Terry already touched upon this. So, right now we are in the midst of a pandemic, but as we all know, this is not the only crisis that we face right now. So we currently actually live in an area of mass extinction and rapid acceleration of climate change. So according to NASA, last year, 2020 was actually the hottest year on record. And the same also goes for sea level levels and reduced sea ice in the Arctic. And we can actually feel the climate change impacts in Europe as well when we think about the heat waves and forest fires in Portugal, crop loss, etc. But at the same time, what's also happening is that Europe consumes more and more. So Europe as a whole, actually we live as if there would be 2.8 Earth. And using the donut, which also is one of the main conference theme, we can clearly see that the economy made up of the 27 EU member states in the UK is clearly overshooting its planetary boundaries. And at the same time, also not necessarily meet all of its social needs when we think about unmet health needs and also still the gender gap in employment. And besides that, Europe is also far away of reaching its environmental policy goals for 2030 and 2050, and also didn't really manage for 2020. Jan and Terry also touched upon this already, but the thing is here, of course, that the overconsumption in Europe contributes to environmental degradation in Europe, but also beyond Europe, so in other regions. And this then leads to the fact that large numbers of people in less privileged countries lose their livelihoods. And this is due to the fact of the externalities that Jan just mentioned, but also because the production and consumption in Europe uses such a disproportionate share of the world's natural resources due to the high volume that it needs for its production and consumption of materials. So basically, we can say that human rights violations associated with environmental degradation and also committed against environmental and social rights activists are clearly linked to the European economy. And as Terry said before, so we really cannot describe this as a sustainable system or economic system. So what becomes clear is that it's impossible to build an ecological and social just economy when we don't tackle the root causes. And in a report that we did with Oxfam Germany that we will launch tomorrow, and I'm also happy to insert the launch event links later, we identified three root causes that we need to tackle. So the first one is the concentration of power and extreme inequality due to a so-called Medici vicious circle, which is a situation where the people or the already rich and the already economic powerful can disproportionately influence decision-making and political rules and design them in the way that they favor them and mostly also in financial terms. The second one is the exploitative structures and the history of colonialism, because we have to face the fact that Europe's prosperity is at least in parts shaped by the deep historical injustice of the past, inequalities and also patriarchal values that our economic system is built on. And the last root cause that we identified is growth dependency and material acceleration. And here in this presentation, I would like to focus on this last aspect and a little bit on the bigger picture. Because as Jan said, I mean, markets have been existing since hundreds of years. But what the problem is with our current economic system is that it's organized around this constant need for expansion of extraction, production, and consumption. And that's what we measure as GDP, so just gross domestic product. So I would say that growth itself is not necessarily bad or good. It's rather this focus on growthism for its own sake and for sake of capital accumulation. What's the problem of our economic system? And yeah, when we look on the impacts of material acceleration, for example, so here on the slide, we see a rather steady rise in material use in the first half of the 19th. And then we can see a doubling from 7 billion to 14 billion tons a year after 1945. And this is exactly the period where GDP becomes a political objective and economic transition, economic expansion starts to accelerate. So it's very astonishing that then from 1980 to 2017, we see material use is exploding. I mean, it's from 35 billion tons to 92 tons. And this increase in material use coincidences also more or less with the rise of global GDP. So we can say that every additional unit of GDP means roughly an additional unit of material extraction. And we can see the same happening with the global emission, and hence also why climate change is accelerating. So then the annual emissions actually more than doubled from 2 billions per year to 5 billions per year during the first half of the 1990s. And this is all despite international climate summits and commitments. And I mean, in the end, this is also hardly surprising because it requires a lot of energy to extract and process all the materials that we consume and produce. So, and also Jan already touched on this. I mean, the core problem is really this narrow focus on GDP growth. So boosting our economic system has really been the main policy objective in the past 70 years, and it's still viewed as necessary to enhance or ensure economic and political stability. But this growth at all costs got us really in a situation where nature, but also other non-profitable resources and processes such as care work is really viewed as an infinitive stretchable resource that is always and steadily available for production. So philosophically thinking, we see some sort of dualism between nature and humans. So we can also see that already when we think about how we describe the living world, because we describe it as natural resources, raw materials, and ecosystem services, because we believe that nature, or what happens to nature, is something external to what happens to humanity. And this, of course, also comes then with a shift, and Jan also mentioned it already before, from a value-based towards a profit-based oriented business culture. So the goal is to produce, to make profits, but it's actually not enough to generate a steady profit. The goal is really to expand the production process and to generate even more profit than before. And we can also clearly see this when we think about investors who look at the rate of profit, so how much a firm's profit grows every year. And then if a company doesn't generate enough surplus, it cannot pay interest, and then investors, following the logic that we have right now, would then probably look somewhere else to invest, and the company might get bankrupt. But of course, here we also need to see that there are differences between large companies on the stock market and then small business owners or restaurants. So this misguided aim of GDP growth persists not only because we or policymakers don't really know an alternative, it's also because our system or the European economy is structurally dependent on GDP growth. And Jan and I, we actually wrote a report on looking into this structural dependence of growth and jobs, which you can also see here, and I can also share the link later, where we basically say that, I mean, our economic system can be best described as an endless treadmill, because this growth-driven market system works or continues to work as long as we become more productive. But then when gains in productivity lead to the loss of formal jobs, if overall production is not expanded, expansion then becomes a necessity to avoid mass employment. And the same we can see, or the same logic we see also with our social security systems. And then moving on, I mean, why we see now, or it's increasing consensus that we need to decarbonize our economies, and we see this with Green New Deal agreements, such as the European Green Deal. I have to say that transforming towards a green economy will not be enough to drastically reduce emissions, nor to enhance gender or social justice, because it still relies on the same old logic and on technology and market mechanism. So there's actually scientific evidence for the fact that decoupling environmental pressures from economic growth has never happened at anywhere near the scale that we need to achieve the Paris agreements, and it's also unlikely that it will ever be achieved. And reasons such as rising energy expenditures, rebound effects, or the limited potential of recycling are all provide reasons for us to be very skeptical about the potential of decoupling, because it's at the moment it's then merely just a shift of problem without tackling the root causes. For example, when we imagine, I mean, once we have 100% renewable energies, I mean, what are we going to do with it if we don't change the way how the economy works? We will just use them, or we just keep on doing what we did before. I mean, we will then use them, or use the power then to continue extraction and production. So it might help with emission, but then it doesn't really help with the other environmental crises that we face, like soil depletion, biodiversity loss, etc. And talking about circularity, another big problem is that we can actually continue infinite growth without harming the environment is by increasing the reuse and recycling of materials. And circular economy policies also in Europe basically aim to do exactly that. However, also here it looks like if we will not manage transformative change, if these policies still aim to continue GDP growth. And there are two main reasons for it. I mean, the first reason is that 44% of our resources are actually food and energy that cannot be recycled. And another reason for this is that studies show that the social and technical feasibility of 100% circularity is actually very challenging and nearly impossible. We see that today only 9% of the global economy is circular. And when we look at the EU, I think in 2019, only 12% of the materials in the EU could actually be recycled. So while, of course, we still need to do all the efforts to make our economy more circular, it becomes clear that this alone will not solve the problem. I mean, because the recyclable materials of the overall throughput is only a very small proportion. So, so bring us what we should need, or what we should aim for, or how we can maybe create a more sustainable economic system is by not thriving for GDP growth, but by getting us into the donut and also keeping us in there. And this, of course, doesn't mean that no sector or no economy or no business can grow anymore. I mean, there will be for sure certain sectors, such as the care sector or the healthcare sector, that will need to grow. And then, here on the last slide, I just have some ideas or solutions or entries and starting points, how we could restructure the market. So, I mean, what I think also became clear from all our presentations is that in order to achieve a paradigm shift, we really need to a shift of mindsets. So first of all, we need to shift the political priorities away from GDP growth towards well-being, and this we can only achieve if we have better methods than gross domestic product to measure the well-being of the people and planet. And there are actually already a lot of good examples out there or different indicators, so we just need to start implementing and replacing GDP. Another essential building block is to end the structural dependency of our economic system on growth. So when we think about work and employment, and we have more examples in our report, is that we need to embrace policies that decouple work from growth. And ideas are working time reductions, more democratization of work, job guarantee schemes, or also a universal basic income. Then another important point is, and I think a lot of NGOs that are here today probably work on these issues, is that we need to provide essential services related to the basic needs that enable the well-being of people, such as affordable housing, healthcare services, etc. Because studies also show that access to public services significantly contribute to the well-being of people and also human welfare much more than striving for GDP growth. And another point I mentioned here also, because we talked about private actors in market, and I think private actors have an essential role to play here, is to end obsolescence and to build a carbon neutral, circular and inclusive economy. And one way is to enhance post-growth adapted product design. So this involves the creation of products that have a longer lifespan, that are modular, or that are more locally produced. Another important aspect is that we need to shift from ownership to usership. So we need to enhance circular and more cooperative or solidarity economic practices, and also increase the agency of the consumers from a consumer to a prosumer. And this could be a right to repair cafes. What else? There's actually also other more sustainable business models. In fact, there are already companies that try to, from their philosophy, to follow a bit more an anti-growth strategy. For example, Patagonia is this outdoor company. They have an anti-growth strategy. So what they do is they provide free repairs and also second-hand products on their store. So it's also not that it's not already out there. There are businesses that already do something. And then the last important aspect is that we need to scale down environmentally destructive industries. So with that, I mean, of course, fossil fuel industries, but then also high carbon industries such as red meat, for example. Yes, so these are just some ideas and food for thought and possible entryways. And I'm really excited to maybe discuss some of those in our Q&A. Thank you very much.